Hi, my name is Jack Scanlan. I'm here as the way I am because I sustained a traumatic brain injury drinking and driving as a 16-year-old juvenile.
As a young boy, he was very adventurous, very athletic, had a great sense of humor, was totally entertained by his two older sisters, so he learned a lot of his tricks from them.
My life before the accident was definitely a full life. I was going to Plymouth Marsh High School in Plymouth Meeting, and I was involved in many types of sports. I was a fullback. I was involved in wrestling and weightlifting, and I was an outfielder for my high school team. But I also played in a community youth baseball league.
When he was quite young, he used to do Spider-Man tricks, climbing up doorways and doing triple somersaults off of my squareback Volkswagen. At one point, he attempted parachuting with green trash bags off the garage.
My academics were all BA level. I did very well in my classwork.
I would say Jack was a young teenager. He was more interested in athletics and hanging out with his guy friends rather than chasing after girls. He wasn't big on going to dances or mixers or anything like that. It was usually going to a game or hanging out with the guys down at the pizza shop.
My dating prior to the accident was pretty non-existent, only to the fact because I was more into myself and more into improving myself and the way that people thought of me. So I thought that getting into a relationship really would not be a right thing for me to do at the time.
He had a pretty happy childhood.
I had my accident December 10th of 1983. That day, actually, I was going around with my friends at the time, driving around in a car that my mother had gotten on loan while another car was being repaired.
And the car that they loaned me was a Laser, which was a type of sports car at the time. I allowed him to take it out one Friday evening and gave him the usual, be careful, drive within the speed limit, not a bunch of kids in the car, that sort of thing. And I had absolutely no qualms about his being responsible.
I was speeding up a road in Lafayette Hill, and I crossed over the peak of a hill and came down in the oncoming lane with a pickup truck going right in my face. I hit my steering wheel hard to my left, and just sideswiping the pickup truck, it threw me into a telephone pole on the side of my car. My head was up against my side window, and when it made impact to the telephone pole, my head went through the window
It was an ordinary Friday night. I was at home with my younger daughter, Amy, and the two older girls were off at college. And around 9:45 that Friday evening, the phone rang, and it was the White Marsh Township Police calling me and asking me or telling me that I should go to Montgomery Hospital and that there had been an accident. And I can remember asking if Jack were alive, and they wouldn't give me any details. So I had to call around and find somebody to drive me to the hospital, and Amy came with me. And when I got there, it was quite a scene. Jack had three other boys in the car with him, and so they were all there. Parents were coming in, and Jack was unconscious, but I can remember that he was vomiting and spastic to some degree. And I wasn't getting very much information, so it was a full night and early morning in the waiting room of the emergency ward with my younger daughter, watching C-SPAN over and over again and hoping that things would be all right. And I made a decision then not to call my other daughters until I had better news. And then Jack's father arrived, and we talked about, what to do next. The neurosurgeon came out and talked to me. And to be perfectly blunt, I was absolutely clueless as to what a traumatic brain injury entailed. And I don't know whether I really absorbed everything that surgeon was saying to me at the time. But they had made a decision or recommended that Jack not have surgery. So he had a closed head trauma, and they were trying to control the brain swelling with drugs, and they put him in the intensive care unit. The next thing I know, I got a call from the insurance rehabilitation nurse, and her name was Meredith Rapp. But she was the one person who really helped to educate me and my family about closed head trauma and worked with us very closely. My first impression was this very tall, commanding woman walking into the intensive care unit with a briefcase and barking orders to the nurses, and then turning to me and saying, bring Jack's high-top sneakers in. And I said, he doesn't wear them. She said, well, then go buy him a pair. And she insisted that he wear his sneakers, high-top sneakers, all day long so that he wouldn't get foot drop, which really was great advice, because his walking would have been greatly impaired if she had not recommended that. And I can remember her interviewing me and asking me about Jack's normal day, how he spent his days. And then after she absorbed all that information, she said to me, I want you to take this tape recorder and take it to the coach and have the coach tape what happens on the bus ride to and from games with the boys, tape some of the locker room conversations, and tell me the times of day that these occurred. I said, okay. So I did that. And then she asked me what TV shows Jack watched daily, and then what things he watched on the weekends. And the next thing I know, a television set appears in the intensive care unit, which is really odd because there was Jack out cold. And she had a whole schedule of television viewing that went on for Jack, regardless of the fact that he was out. And then she had these tape recordings of the kids and what they were saying at different times during the day, and they were played on a schedule. And it seems as though she had been involved in traumatic brain injury for quite a while, and there were theories that if you could stimulate brain activity by making the familiar available to the patient. So that went on for almost 2.5 weeks, and then Jack was moved to the acute care part of the hospital, and he was there for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and the whole time during intensive care and in the acute care hospital, Jack was had a regular schedule of exercise therapy. The exercise therapist came in and worked all his limbs so that he wouldn't become atrophied. Family came and talked to him like he was wide awake. About the first or second week of January, Meredith and I talked, and she said it was time to move him. And she was adamant that he not go in a nursing home. And that really was what happened to these young people at that time. It was 25 years ago. And she worked very hard to influence the folks at Bryn Mawr Rehabilitation Hospital to take Jack. And they usually didn't take people as young as Jack. So they finally said yes, he could come. And he had to be in a locked ward, which was okay. And for the first week, he was in a regular hospital bed, but going through a series of therapies. And then this wonderful physician out there recommended that they empty his hospital room, and they put up a contraption called a Craig bed, which had plywood sides with hinges at one point where you could walk in and out. And the sides were lined with exercise mats, and there was an exercise mat on the floor. And then Jack slept in there and worked out in there, and he was free. He was not tied down or strapped down in a bed. And again, the theory was that this physician who's out in the Midwest and dealt with a lot of head injuries as a result of skiing and sledding accidents felt that the stimulation of the brain, of the body, would stimulate the brain. So the whole football team would come out to visit Jack and sit in this Craig bed. Our dog at the time, Tuffy, who was a wonderful little mutt, was allowed to come visit. And it was it was almost like a little party every time Jack had visitors, but he seemed to respond, but we couldn't tell. And it's a very mysterious business, this closed head trauma. I went back to work before the end of December, and I can remember getting a call in, I guess, late January, and it was Bryn Mawr, and they said to me, Jack's not responding, he's stuck at level 2 or something like that. There's several levels of brain activity. And that was really the first time that I cried, because I thought, oh, it's useless, it's not going to work. And I called Meredith, and again, Meredith to the rescue. She interceded, and they allowed Jack to stay a little longer. And at that time, my oldest daughter, Sally, was at her sinus college, and she would drive down to visit Jack on a regular basis at Bryn Mawr. And she drove down late one afternoon, and Jack was strapped in a wheelchair, and he had a band around his head to keep his head straight, and his eyes were wide open. And Sally was holding hands with him and talking at him. And she was reminiscing about how they used to thumb wrestle. And she was talking to Jack, and she was thumb wrestling with him. And slowly, Jack's thumb began to move. And that was a breakthrough moment, because Sally jumped up and she ran to get the nurse and came back and showed that Jack was receiving information.
I woke up in the hospital. I was in a coma for 3.5 months.
They knew then that things were working, and then he made several bold steps in terms of levels up. He went from like a 2 to a 4. And they started to really aggressively work him out. And I would say the people at Bryn Mawr were extremely creative, very dedicated. They even fashioned what looked like a skateboard, but it was a bodyboard. And Jack would surf through the hallways at night when the other patients were not using the hallways, and they would race him against his own times. They would challenge him because they knew he was competitive, and that would build up his upper body strength. He worked with a series of therapists there who were just fabulous. They started his cognitive retraining, and he worked on an Apple computer.
I was an inpatient at Rehab for about 6.5 months. When I first came out of the coma, I could not walk. So I was having to get around using a wheelchair for at least a year. I was involved with outpatient therapy from Rehab for probably the next 5 years.
One of his first therapists was Kathy Cosgrove, who was fabulous and worked with him for months and months and months. Later came back into his life as a case manager for another rehab company, and then later as a case manager for an insurance company. And so she was an integral part of Jack's moving forward.
I met Jack Scanlan approximately, I'm thinking like 19 or 20 years ago. And I was working in a community reentry program for traumatic brain injury. And Jack was one of the patients that I work with to help reacclimate back into society in general, just as a job and thinking processes, and just helping him to kind of figure out where he wanted to go in the world and what he needed to do to get there.
I went through many different types of therapies. While I was at Rehab, I went through cognitive therapy, I went through speech therapy, I went through occupational therapy, I went through much physical therapy, and I did some recreational therapy.
From the very first time I met Jack, he was like that little engine that could. He was always the person who said, I think I can, I think I can. And I often, when I work with patients now, will use Jack as an example, because they said he wouldn't walk, he walked. They said he wouldn't talk, he talks. They said he wouldn't do all these things. And when I look back over the years, I can honestly say he's been one of the most rewarding people that I've worked with, because he never gave up. So you can credit all the professionals, all the team of people, everyone that touched him in some way. But that inner strength and that fire all came definitely from Jack.
I would like to be an advocate for disabled persons, but I'd also like to be there for the non-disabled community in understanding and learning how to work with persons with disabilities. I am here to be an inspiration.
And Jack's had many people in his life that have made him what he is today.
One of Jack's other strengths is just a very committed family.
I think that the one thing that Jack has that many people don't have is that he has a huge supportive family. His immediate family, his sisters, have never left him. They have stood by his side. They have supported him. That does not mean that they enable him. It does not mean that they don't give him tough love, but they have stood by him these 25 years. He has something like 54 first cousins, and every single one of those families has been involved in Jack's journey along the way. He's had cousins who are so faithful that they see him almost every other weekend. They're a blessing and a gift.
I am also looking to eventually develop a talk show and interview persons who would like to learn more about the dealings with disabled individuals.
And my advice to him in this TV venture is start small. And I know he has big ideas, and big ideas are wonderful, and you should have big dreams. But you have to demonstrate success one step at a time.
For people to truly understand the impact of what a traumatic brain injury is and how it affects every aspect of your life, I think that is best told by a person who's been through that experience.
Polish this so it's a jewel, and really think about what it is that he wants from it and how he wants to influence the general public about knowledge of head trauma and what they can do to help folks who are in this situation.
I would never say you won't do anything because I learned my lesson. You always seem to beat those odds.
That pretty much is my story, and I'm sticking to it.